I'm convinced that we need to rethink creativity. We need to completely question the way we think about what creativity is and why it exists. Part of the reason is that I believe our mental anchors for creativity are all wrong. They're failing us. To make my case, I want to summon the power of metaphor. Now, metaphors are near and dear to my heart. I know that sounds a little weird, but it's true. Professionally and personally, I love metaphors. You see, metaphors help us think about life in a different way. Let me explain. I have 4 kids, and 3 of them are teenagers right now. And they're all great kids, I promise. But I've come to believe that there is something incredibly fundamental and essential for my everyday life. Yes, even my mental health. Dad jokes, okay? My favorite one right now is, what do peppers do when they get angry? Clearly, they get jalapeno face. You know, jalapeno face, okay? I have one more. I love that space when I'm with my kids and we get to process life out loud. Maybe it's a Sunday morning with my 17-year-old, and inevitably we'll be talking about something and there'll be something complex that I want to describe. And the teacher in me will reach for some metaphor. It's like a Forrest Gump moment where life is a little bit like a box of chocolates. And while they're deciding whether my metaphor is funny or stupid, I'll try to close the deal. I'll say something, hey, I never metaphor I didn't like, right? Okay, this one's even worse than the pepper joke, I promise. But the truth is, I nerd out over metaphors. Ask my kids. About 10 years ago, I read this book called Metaphors We Live By, written by 2 philosophers named George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. And in it, they convinced me that our lives are shaped by deep, or what they call conceptual metaphors. And since then, I've been hooked. I've used metaphors in my research, my teaching, and my work with organizations. And the big idea is that metaphors shape not just the way we talk, but the way we think, feel, act, and even move. Let me give you an example. In the Western world, our dominant metaphor for argument is war. If you think about the language we use words like, hey, I felt attacked, or wait, give me a chance to defend myself, or you sure shot down his argument, or even, boom, roasted, right? These phrases, it's almost impossible to not think that there has to be a winner and a loser. There has to be destruction. And so if we pause for a moment and we crack open the idea that maybe there could be an alternate way to think about argument. What if we considered argument as dance? It sounds a little strange, right? But picture for a moment there's still 2 sides. There's still tension. But instead of arguing in a warlike fashion, there's harmony. There's rhythm. There's balance. There's purpose. And so the whole idea about deep metaphors is that they do illuminate parts of our reality, but they also obscure other parts in ways that the only thing we need is an alternate metaphor. Now, I want to talk about metaphors of creativity because I believe that our current metaphors are all wrong and they're not getting us past where we need to be. So what are they? One of the common ones we hear about is that creativity is outside the box. The common idea is that our normal life is in the box and creativity lives outside of it. Now, the problem with this metaphor is that typically the box is our context. It's where we live. And I tell my students in product design that oftentimes what we most need is to understand that context and have empathy for the people within it. The other thing about this invisible box is that once we get outside of it, there's just another box. In the end, it's not very helpful. Another metaphor we use is the masterpiece metaphor. It's this idea that's really tied with the aesthetics, with art and literature and music, these great things, right? And so we think Van Gogh, or we think Miles Davis, or maybe the Eiffel Tower, or perhaps we think of the wonderful literary world of Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling's creation. Maybe we think of science and industry, people like Marie Curie, who had 2 Nobel Prizes for radioactivity. Or more recently, Esther Duflo and her colleagues who won the Nobel Prize for Development Economics. Or sometimes, we don't have to look any further from our hand. We think of our smartphones as, wow, this is super creative. Who made this? Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with masterpiece. Masterpiece and the geniuses who create them inspire us. The hard part is that sometimes we valorize that creative output in ways that distance us from everyday creativity. And they can whisper to us that, I can never be like that. I could never be that creative. And so they hide some of the possibility that's available in the everyday. The other unintended consequence for the masterpiece metaphor is that it really inspires perfectionism. There's this fun story from a book called Art and Fear, where this instructor who teaches ceramics said, okay, I'm going to take one half of the class, and your grade is going to be based on a single piece of pottery that you develop across the course of the semester. No pressure, right? This is how I do my classes. I'm just kidding. The other side, he said, your grade is going to be based on the weight of pottery. 50 pounds, you get an A. 40 pounds, you get a B. I'd kind of like to be on that side, wouldn't you? Now, which side do you think created the most high-quality pottery at the end of the course? It was actually the side that wasn't reaching for perfection. It was the side that constantly practiced and failed a lot. It's often been said that the enemy of excellence is good. Well, I say that the enemy of creativity can be this obsession for perfection, but the masterpiece metaphor hides that. Now, of all the metaphors that do harm, I believe, to creativity, it's this idea that creativity is a personality trait, that you either have it or you don't. Now, I fully believe that we need to embrace creativity as part of who we are. That's really critical. But it's the foggy lenses of personality profiling that assign people to different creative norms and say, you're creative and you're not creative. There's this binary thing going on. The other thing that it does is it promotes dysfunctional beliefs about ourselves. And this, I think, is no more clear than in what we call the 75%. You see, there's been these studies for several years in various cultures that ask people, how creative are you? The sad news is that 75% put themselves in this category of, I'm not very creative. If we extrapolate that out, that's 6 billion people out of the global population who might put themselves in that category. And for me, the bottom line is I simply believe that is not true. We are all born with an innate capacity to be creative. So how do we restore creativity for the 75%? Well, if dominant metaphors like the box and the masterpiece metaphor and personality especially are not helping us, where do we go to? Are there alternate metaphors that we can lean into and rely on? I want to give us a few ideas. The first one might be, maybe we think of creativity as a posture. It's an embodied practice, kind of like a yoga pose, where we have to have balance and slow down and even stretch a little bit. Or maybe we think of creativity as a garden, where there's a lot of weeding that needs to happen. And we need to curate all the resources around us to create order out of chaos so that beauty and nourishment rises up. Or perhaps creativity is more like a muscle, right? You got to sweat. You got to practice. Because if you don't, your creativity muscles are going to atrophy. Or I love this one. What if we thought of creativity as a virtue? It's not just for me. Creativity is relational, and it's essential for promoting goodness in our world. I'd like to propose, my favorite one is a combination of these last two. It's the idea that creativity can be a superpower, your superpower. That creativity untaps the most diverse, highest expression of your gifts. It says that no matter who you are, or where you're from, or what you're good at or not good at, you can be creative. Now, if creativity is a superpower, we need an origin story, right? If you've seen any Marvel movies or you've read any comic books, we know that every superhero has an origin story, right? Now, I'm not talking about the kind of origin story where someone close to you has to die, or you have to fall into a pit, or get bit by a spider. But remember the 75%. You see, the research shows that there's this creativity erosion. That young people have this really high creative capacity, but erodes over time. In fact, the research was so depressing, they had to stop doing it. And so, this isn't good, right? So we need creativity origin stories because it's like that movie Inside Out. There's some creativity glowing marble that goes dark, and we need to relight it, right? So we need origin stories to help us do that. So let's talk about origin stories. Origin stories, simply put, are tales of transformation, where a character understands themselves in a new way. They understand that they have powers they didn't even know they had. And it sets their life on a path to use those powers for good. I want to propose that origin stories have at least 3 chapters. Chapter 1 involves creativity totems and mentors. Now, a creativity totem, simply put, is an experience that becomes a memory, that then becomes a marker or a symbol that fuels my creativity. I want to give you an example of one of mine. So this is a picture that I drew 30 plus years ago in art class in middle school. All I remember about it is that I wanted to use all the colors in the box. And a rainbow's a pretty good way to do that, right? I would have completely forgotten about this picture. It would have been tossed into the middle school trash bin probably. Except my mom decided, no, we need to frame this. And she spent $75 to buy this really nice frame and to make sure the matting looked great and to hang it on the wall. And I never forgot it. We need mentors and totems. Now, if you get to chapter 2, that's where you encounter all the challenge and the failure. This is not the fun part. This is the part where phrases like, maybe we should let so-and-so do it because they're more creative than me. Or, I'm sorry, I just can't do that. Start to reverberate in our minds. And so we need those mentors and those totems to fuel us. Finally, if we get to chapter 3, that's where the spark hits, where our creative self goes from Peter Parker to Spider-Man, from Carol Danvers to Captain Marvel. And we begin to actively cultivate the creativity in us to better our world. So here's my ask of you. Be mindful about the metaphors and the stories of creativity you're telling yourself. Don't let people around you divide the world into creative and not creative. And finally, treat the spark and the renewal of creativity as important as literacy itself, because the truth is that creativity can be the very highest expression of your diverse gifts. Use all of this to write a creativity origin story and encourage others to do the same. Thanks.